The rain came without warning, the way most things that change your life tend to do. One moment I was standing outside the lecture hall, bag slung over one shoulder, watching the last of my classmates disappear into the dark. And the next, the sky cracked open like something had been holding it together with nothing more than tension and pride. I had no umbrella. I never had an umbrella. My mother called it a character flaw. I called it optimism. Standing soaked to the bone on the stone steps of Aldermore Hall, I was starting to think she had a point. I pulled my hoodie tighter, but it was already wet through. The fabric clung to my arms with that cold, unhappy insistence that made everything feel slightly more miserable than it actually was. I was calculating whether I could make it to the bus stop without losing a toe to hypothermia when I heard footsteps on the stairs behind me. "You look like you're about to cry." I turned. Julio Craig was leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed, watching me with the particular kind of lazy amusement that I had come to understand was just his face. Dark eyes, jaw like someone had carved it to make a point, hair a little longer on top, and perpetually falling across his forehead in a way that probably took zero effort and still looked deliberate. He was in the advanced composition seminar I sometimes crashed when my own workload was light enough to let me be curious. We had spoken exactly 4 times before that night, once about a printer jam, twice about the reading list, and once when I accidentally sat in his seat and he told me with complete calm that it was fine. I could stay. He preferred the window anyway. I did not know him. I knew of him the way you know of a song you keep hearing through a wall, familiar enough to hum, not enough to name. "I'm not about to cry," I said. "I'm strategizing." He looked at the rain, then at me, then at the rain again, as if giving it a fair hearing. "How's that going?" "Poorly." He pushed off the doorframe and unzipped his jacket. It was one of those heavy canvas ones, the kind with a corduroy collar and deep pockets that looked like they'd been through 3 winters and come out better for it. Muted olive green, the kind of jacket that had opinions. "Here." He held it out toward me. I blinked. "What?" "You're shivering." "I'm fine." "Marco." He said my name, the way people say a word they've known for a long time, but are only now hearing out loud. Settled, like it belonged in his mouth. "You're not fine. Take the jacket." There are moments where your body makes a decision before your brain has finished arguing. My hands reached out and took it. The lining was warm from him. That specific, intimate warmth that only exists in recently worn things, and when I pulled it on over my wet hoodie, it felt almost indecent, like putting on someone's skin. It smelled like cedar and something darker underneath, something I couldn't name but would spend the next 3 weeks trying to. "What about you?" I managed. He shrugged. He had a thick knit sweater underneath, charcoal gray, the kind that looked like it had been meant for weather. "I'm fine. You literally just said those exact words weren't convincing." He smiled. Not a big smile. A small one, tucked into the corner of his mouth like he was saving it for later. Different circumstances. We stood there for a second, the rain between us and the light from inside the building cutting a warm rectangle onto the wet steps. Then he said, "I'll walk you to the bus stop." "You don't have to." "I know." And that was that. We walked. He didn't put his hood up because he didn't have one. He just walked through the rain with his hands in his pockets like weather was something that happened to other people, and I wore his jacket, and we talked the whole way without either of us seeming to decide to. That was the first thing that surprised me about Julio Craig, how easy it was to talk to him. I had built him up in my head into something slightly imposing, a figure more than a person, because that is what happens when you notice someone from a distance long enough. You start filling in the silences with myth. But up close, in the rain, he was just a person with opinions about things. About the seminar. About the way certain writers confuse density with depth. About the coffee from the machine on the 3rd floor, which he claimed was technically a hate crime. By the time we reached the bus stop, I had forgotten I was cold. The bus came. I stepped onto it and turned back, and he was still standing there in the rain looking at me with that calm expression that I was starting to realize wasn't indifference. It was something else, something more careful. "Your jacket," I said, already reaching to unzip it. "Keep it," he said. "You're still cold. I'll give it back Monday." "Sure." He stepped back from the curb as the doors closed, and I watched him through the smeared glass until the bus turned the corner and he disappeared. I sat on the bus in his jacket and tried to pretend my heart wasn't doing something embarrassing. Monday came and I brought the jacket. I had washed it. I probably shouldn't have, or maybe I should have. I went back and forth about it approximately 40 times between Friday night and Sunday morning. Washing it felt presumptuous. Not washing it felt worse. In the end, I washed it on delicate, dried it on low, and folded it with the kind of careful attention I usually reserve for things I was terrified of ruining. I found Julio in the courtyard between the arts block and the library, which is where he apparently spent his breaks, because I had noticed this before without ever admitting to myself that I had. He was reading, sitting on the low stone wall with one foot propped up and a paperback in his hand, and he didn't look up until I was standing right in front of him. "Hey," I said, and held out the jacket. He looked at it, then at me. Something passed across his face, something brief and unreadable. He reached out and took it, and when our fingers overlapped for just a second around the folded canvas, I felt it in places I really didn't want to be feeling things. "You washed it," he said. "I hope that was okay." "More than okay." He set it on the wall beside him and looked at me with that expression again, the careful one. "You didn't have to do that. You didn't have to lend it to me." We existed in that sentence for a moment. "Sit down," he said, not a command, more like an invitation shaped like something quieter. I sat. We were close enough that our shoulders were almost touching. The October air had that sharp clarity that feels like the world has been washed clean, and the light was doing something gold and sideways through the trees, and I was aware of him in that specific, unbearable way you become aware of someone when you've been trying not to be. We talked again. That was the second surprise, that it kept being easy. He asked about my thesis. I asked about the piece he'd been workshopping in the seminar. He had opinions about structure that I disagreed with, and we argued about them in a way that felt like sparring with someone who was enjoying it as much as you were. At some point he laughed, a real one, full and sudden, and I realized I had been trying to make that happen without knowing I was trying. When I stood up to go, he looked at the jacket folded on the wall between us. "You should take it," he said. I stopped. "What? In case it rains." "Oh, Julio, it's not going to rain. Look at the sky. Weather changes." I looked at him. He was looking at the jacket. There was something almost deliberate in the way he wasn't looking at me, as if he was choosing not to very carefully. "Okay," I said, because apparently my body was still making decisions without me. I picked up the jacket. I walked to my seminar. I sat through 90 minutes of literary theory with his jacket folded across my knees and the word "okay" ringing in my ears like I'd said something I couldn't take back. Here is the thing about falling for someone. It doesn't happen in a single moment, no matter what anyone tells you. It happens in accumulation. It happens in the small moments that don't seem like anything until you look back and realize they've been adding up all along, quietly, without your permission, like interest on a debt you didn't know you'd taken out. This is what accumulated. The way he remembered things I said in passing. Not in a performative way, not the way people repeat things back to prove they were listening. He just remembered them naturally, brought them up later in the middle of other conversations, and every time he did, I felt the particular vertigo of being actually seen. The way he argued with me. He pushed back on my ideas without making me feel small, and when I pushed back on his, he got more interested, not defensive. He leaned in when he disagreed with me. I started saying things I wasn't sure I believed just to see what he'd do with them. The coffee thing. At some point, we started getting coffee after the Tuesday seminar. This was never formally established. One week, I said I needed caffeine, and he said there's a place on Marin Street that isn't terrible, and we went, and then the next week, we just went without discussing it. And then, it was a thing we did. The way he texted, not constantly, not with that anxious frequency that people use to fill silence because they're afraid of it. He texted when he had something to say, and what he said was usually specific and strange and often funny. And I would read his messages 2 or 3 times before responding because I wanted to be sure I was giving him something worth reading back. 3 weeks. 3 weeks passed, and his jacket was still hanging on the hook by my door. I thought about returning it, probably twice a day. I would look at it in the morning and think, today, bring it today. And then I would get to wherever Julio was and look at him, and somehow the jacket never came up. He never mentioned it, not once. And I told myself, waiting for him to ask. This was a lie, I was telling myself, and I knew it was a lie. The truth was, I didn't want to give it back, not because I was attached to an object. I'm not especially sentimental about objects. The truth was that as long as he hadn't asked for it, it felt like something was still open between us, like a question still being asked. The jacket was a permission slip for something I hadn't named yet. My roommate Dane noticed it, because Dane notices everything and considers it his personal duty to comment on all of it. He came into the kitchen one morning while I was making eggs, and looked at the hook by the door and looked at me and said, in that tone he uses that is technically a question but is actually a statement. That's not your jacket. Observant of you, I said. Whose is it? A friend's. Uh-huh. He poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter. How long has your friend's jacket been on our hook? I don't know, Marco. What? That jacket has been there since the second week of October. Has it? It's November. I'm aware of the calendar, Dane. He looked at me over his mug. He had the expression of someone who loves you enough to be annoying about it. Just so you know, he said, the appropriate amount of time to hold someone's jacket before it becomes a thing is approximately 1 week. We are past that. Nothing is a thing. The jacket disagrees. I ignored him with extreme dignity and ate my eggs and did not think about the way Julio had smiled at me in the coffee shop the previous Tuesday when I said something about Borges that he disagreed with in a way that meant he found it interesting. I did not think about how he'd rested his chin in his hand and watched me make my argument. I did not think about the small silence afterward where he'd said nothing but hadn't looked away. I was not thinking about any of this. There was an end-of-term showcase for the creative writing MFA students, and I had been vaguely planning to attend because 2 people in my cohort were presenting work. I didn't know Julio would be there until I was already inside, and I heard his voice across the room and felt my whole body reorganize around the sound of it. Quick pause here. If you want to watch our videos early with 0 ads or get access to exclusive videos, our Patreon has you covered, link in the description. Alright, back to where things get interesting. He was talking to a woman I didn't recognize, laughing at something, and he looked different out of the academic context. Easier somehow. Like the professional version of himself had been loosened at the collar. He had a glass of wine in one hand, and his other hand was making a gesture in the air that I recognized. That particular rolling motion he made when he was in the middle of explaining something he found genuinely exciting. I watched him for exactly 3 seconds before reminding myself that this was creepy and going to find the work my cohort friends had put up. The pieces were on the far wall, handwritten pages in glass frames alongside printed commentary. I was reading one of them when Julio appeared at my elbow. Didn't know you'd be here, he said. Didn't know you'd be here either. 2 of my closest friends are in the MFA. He looked at the piece I was reading. What do you think? Honestly? The imagery in the 3rd stanza is incredible, but the ending feels like it's hedging. I thought the same thing. He leaned in slightly to read more closely, and I was aware of his shoulder against mine, just barely. Like it gets right up to the edge and then pulls back. Exactly. Like it's afraid of what it was actually about to say. There was a beat. Neither of us moved away from each other. Are you getting wine? He asked. Sure, we got wine. We moved through the showcase together, which felt natural in a way that made me slightly dizzy. He knew more of the exhibitors than I did, and introduced me to several of them, and each time he introduced me, he said, "This is Marco," not "This is my classmate," or "This is someone from the program." Just my name, offered up without qualifier, like I was a known quantity in his world. I kept turning that over in my head. Around 9 o'clock the event wound down and people started filtering out. We ended up outside on the steps, the night cold and clear and the city making its distant, luminous noise all around us, and neither of us was quite leaving. The jacket's still at my place, I said finally, because I had to. Because it had been 3 weeks and standing next to him in the dark, I couldn't keep pretending I wasn't acutely aware of everything the jacket meant. He turned to look at me. The light from inside the building was warm on the side of his face. "I know," he said. "Just that. I know." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd heard in months. "You could have asked for it back," I said. "I know. But you didn't." "No." I looked at him. He looked at me. My heart was doing something dramatic and unhelpful. "Why?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. He had that expression on his face, the careful one, and I was starting to understand what it meant. It didn't mean he was withholding. It meant he was choosing. Julio Craig chose his words the way other people chose their steps on uncertain ground, deliberately, with full attention to where he was putting his weight. "I thought," he said slowly, "that if I didn't ask, you might bring it up, and if you brought it up, I'd have a reason to talk to you about why it was still there." I breathed in. The cold air filled my chest. "And why is it still there?" I asked. He looked at me for another long moment, and I could see him deciding something. I could see the moment he decided. "Because," he said, "I think you already know." We walked. I don't know how else to describe it. We just started walking without agreeing to go anywhere, the way you do when you're in the middle of something and stopping feels like a loss. The streets were quiet in that particular way, that cold nights make cities quiet, like the temperature has pressed everything inward, and our footsteps were loud on the pavement. We walked for almost an hour without stopping, and we talked about everything and nothing, which is to say we talked about our families and our childhoods and the writers that broke us open when we were young. And we made each other laugh more than once, and sometimes we just walked without talking, and the silence was the easiest silence I had ever been in. At some point he reached across the small space between us and his hand brushed mine. Not a grab, a brush, slow and deliberate, like a question. I turned my palm up. He slid his hand into mine, and we kept walking. I think I stopped breathing for about half a block. Then I breathed again, and it felt like the first real breath I'd taken in weeks. We ended up at a late-night cafe that he knew, tucked down a side street with fogged-up windows and a menu written in chalk. We sat in the corner with tea and the conversation that had been building between us for weeks, or maybe for longer, maybe since I first noticed him through the wall of my own careful distance. "I've been trying to figure out what this is," I told him, wrapping both hands around my mug. "Between us. What have you figured out?" "That I don't want to hand you your jacket back and have it be over." He was quiet for a moment. "Why would it be over?" "Because then there'd be no reason." "There are lots of reasons." He looked at me steadily. "I like talking to you. I look forward to Tuesdays in a way that started to feel embarrassing. I notice when you're not in a room before I've consciously registered that I was looking for you." A pause. "I gave you that jacket because I wanted to do something for you. And then I didn't ask for it back because—" He stopped. Something vulnerable moved across his face briefly. "Because I didn't want to close a door I wasn't sure I was allowed to open." The cafe was warm, and the windows were fogged, and there was nothing between us but a small table and honesty. "Julio," I said. "Yeah, the door's open." He looked at me. And then he smiled, and it was the first time I'd seen him smile without that small, careful tucking away quality. The first time it was just fully there, full and warm, and I felt it all the way through. "Okay," he said, like a breath, like a decision. We stayed until the cafe was closing. He walked me home. This was not something we had discussed, but it happened the way things between us happened, naturally, without needing a vote. At my door we stood in that particular liminal space that doorways create, neither inside nor out, the whole night still technically possible in either direction. "Come in," I said. He came in. Dane was asleep, or at least doing a convincing impression of it. The flat was quiet, lit only by the lamp in the corner that I always left on when I went out. And there, on the hook by the door, was his jacket. He saw it the moment I did. We both looked at it at the same time, and then at each other. "You want it back?" I asked. He reached out. For a second I thought he was reaching for the jacket. Then his hand found my jaw instead, tilting my face up slightly, and he kissed me. It was the kind of kiss that doesn't announce itself. It arrived the way he arrived in most things, quietly, with full intention, and with the quality of something that had been thought about carefully before being said. His mouth was warm against mine, and the hand at my jaw was steady, and I think I made a small sound that I will be mortified about for the rest of my life. But in the moment, couldn't have stopped if I'd tried. When we separated, we were both still standing in exactly the same positions, just closer. "No," he said softly, "I don't want it back." Point 20. Point 20. Point 20. Point 20. Point 20. 20. "The jacket is yours." His thumb brushed my cheekbone. "I'll get another one." I laughed, a real one, sudden and unguarded, and his smile in response was something I wanted to put somewhere safe and look at when I needed reminding that good things happened. "You're being extremely symbolic," I told him. "I'm always symbolic. You're in a writing program, you should appreciate that." "I do appreciate it. I'm choosing to also mock it." "Noted." He kissed me again, briefer this time, punctuation rather than statement. Then he stepped back, that considered expression back in place, but softer now. "Permissioned. I should let you sleep." "You don't have to." He looked at me. Something moved behind his eyes. "I know," he said, for the third time that night, meaning something new each time. "But some things are worth doing slowly." I had no argument for that. I wanted to have an argument for that, but I didn't. "Okay," I said. "Tuesday," he said at the door. "Tuesday," I agreed. And then he was gone, and I was standing in my flat with his jacket on the hook, and my heart going at a completely irresponsible rate. And I thought, so this is what it feels like when something is actually happening. There was a Sunday in there that I keep coming back to when I try to explain to myself how this happened. Not a dramatic Sunday, not a Sunday with revelations or turning points. Just a Sunday, the way Sundays can be when you're in the slow middle of something and you haven't quite realized yet that what you're in the middle of is your actual life. He had texted in the morning, unhurried, the way he always texted, not demanding anything. Just, "Are you doing anything today? I have a feeling about the farmer's market near the park." And I had said, "I have absolutely no plans and several good reasons to leave the flat." So we went. The market was the kind that takes over a whole street, spilling out of its official borders in the comfortable, inevitable way of things with too much enthusiasm. Produce stalls and bread, and people selling things in unlabeled jars with handwritten descriptions. There was a man playing the violin at the corner, doing absolutely nothing to make him famous and everything to make the morning better. Julio bought 3 different kinds of cheese with the focused attention of someone taking it seriously. He asked the vendor questions. He had opinions. He compared rind textures with an expression of genuine investment that made me want to fold the image up and put it somewhere safe. When he finally chose, he turned to me with his paper bag and said, "This one is going to be worth it," with such certainty that I believed him completely, about the cheese and about everything adjacent to the cheese. We walked the market for an hour and a half and bought things we didn't strictly need and talked about nothing that would hold up to scrutiny. A podcast he'd been listening to about navigation, whether sourdough had peaked culturally or was genuinely going to be a permanent fixture. The novel I was halfway through and was starting to distrust. He listened to all of it with that quality of attention that still startled me sometimes, not performing interest, just having it. At one point, he stopped to look at a stall selling old maps, the kind reprinted from cartographic surveys 100 years dead. He picked one up and held it in both hands, studying it, and I watched him from 2 feet away and thought about how strange and ordinary it was. Standing next to someone in a Sunday market and feeling exactly as much as I felt. "Look at this," he said, not turning around, just trusting I was still there. I stepped closer. He held the map out between us, a faded representation of somewhere coastal, topography lines pressed close together where the land rose sharply. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "This bit." He pointed to a curved section of coastline. They got the shape almost completely wrong. The actual coastline looks nothing like this. But it was the best they could do with what they had. He turned it over in his hands. And people navigated by it. People trusted this and found their way. I looked at the map, then at him. Is there a metaphor here? I asked. Isn't there always? He set it back down, catching my eye with that small tucked smile. We work with incomplete information. We navigate anyway. I held his gaze for a moment. Are you talking about us? Partially. He picked up a different map, also just literally about cartography. We bought the first map. It's on my wall now, next to the window, the incorrect coastline looking out at the city. I like that it's wrong. I like that it was useful anyway. We went to his place after the market. He made lunch with the cheese he'd bought and the bread from the last stall and some things assembled from the logic of his fridge. And it was simple and very good, and we ate at his kitchen table in the early afternoon light, while the building made its settling noises around us. After lunch he read and I wrote, both of us in the same room in comfortable parallel, and it was the kind of afternoon that feels like proof, not of anything in particular, just proof. That evening walking home, I passed the bus stop where I'd been standing in the rain and looked at it, the way you look at somewhere you've been before that you know differently now, and thought about maps and incomplete information and navigating anyway. I thought, I am navigating. I think I'm finding my way. Slow, it turned out, looked like this. Morning texts that arrived before 8, specific questions about my day, or a recommendation for something he'd read, or occasionally just something he thought about that he apparently needed to send to me before it got away from him. They arrived with the consistency of someone who had decided to make a habit of me, and I answered them with the care of someone who was trying not to care, too, obviously, and failing. Coffee on Tuesdays, which extended to coffee on Thursdays after his afternoon seminar, and then lunch on Wednesdays when our schedules aligned, and then a walk on Saturday mornings that neither of us suggested formally, but that seemed to just become something we did. The particular way he sat when he was listening to something he found interesting, body turned slightly toward you, one elbow on whatever surface was available. That focused stillness that made you feel like you were the only thing in the room worth paying attention to. Being on the receiving end of that was something I was still getting used to. It was a lot, in a very good way. The slow was also this, his hand at the small of my back when we walked into places together, brief and easy, like the most natural gesture in the world. It was never a statement. It was just care. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself. I told him things I hadn't told most people. Not because he asked. He was never one of those people who push at your edges to see what's inside, but because he created space in a way that made things fall into it naturally. I told him about my father and the complicated architecture of that relationship. I told him about the months after I left my last job before going back to school, the months that were difficult in ways I'm still not entirely good at talking about. I told him about the specific loneliness of being someone who finds words easier on paper than in person, and how that had made a lot of things harder than they needed to be. He listened without fixing. That was the thing. He let things be complicated without rushing to resolve them. When he responded, it was thoughtful and honest, not reassuring in that hollow way where someone is just trying to end the discomfort. And he gave things back. Not in the transactional way where someone shares because you've shared. In the genuine way, the way where you could tell the things he was telling you weren't usually told. He was 31 to my 28, and the 3 years felt less like distance and more like the fact that he'd had slightly longer to decide who he was. He was still deciding, he told me. He thought you were always deciding. I thought that was probably right. One Wednesday over lunch, he told me about his ex, a man named Patrick, with whom he'd spent 4 years and then not. And the way he talked about it was honest, in a way that was painful to witness from the outside. Not because he was heartbroken still, I didn't think he was, but because I could see what it had cost him. The kind of relationship that teaches you things and also takes things, the way significant ones tend to. What did you learn? I asked. He thought about it. That I close off when things get hard. I go quiet. I convince myself that the other person is better off not knowing what's going on with me. It's a very efficient way to ruin something good. He looked at his coffee. I'm working on that. You seem pretty open to me. You make it easier. He said it matter-of-factly, like an observation rather than a compliment, which somehow made it land harder than a compliment would have. I sat with that for a moment. "What about you?" he asked. "What's the thing you're working on?" "Letting things be real before I've decided they're safe," I said. "I tend to keep things at a distance until I'm sure they won't disappear." Which is, I stopped. Which is also an efficient way to ruin something good, probably. He looked at me across the table. Then he reached out and covered my hand with his, warm and unhurried. "So we're both working on things," he said. "Seems like." "Good," he said very simply. "Then we can work on them in the same direction." It would be dishonest to tell this as though it was only smooth. The accumulation was real, and the softness was real, and the things we built between us were real. But there was also a week in the middle of November that reminded me that nothing easy is ever really easy. It's just working quietly. I pulled back. I can't explain it except to say that it happens sometimes, a kind of internal alarm that goes off when things start to feel too good, like my nervous system still hasn't updated its threat assessment. I got quiet. I stopped initiating our texts. When he suggested Thursday coffee, I said I had reading to catch up on, which was technically true but was not the reason. He noticed. Of course he noticed. He gave me 3 days. Then he texted, "Are you okay? Just checking. No pressure." I stared at my phone for a long time before answering. I typed, "Yeah, sorry, just in my head a bit. I'll explain when I see you." He responded, "Okay." "Tuesday?" "Tuesday," I said. Tuesday arrived with the gray resilience that late autumn has, the sky refusing to fully commit to either rain or clarity. I was at the coffee shop on Marin Street first, and when he came through the door and took off his coat and sat across from me, I was struck all over again by the specific difficulty of being someone who is in the process of falling in love. You want to be rational about it. You want to be measured. And then the person sits down, and you remember that rationality and measurement have very little to do with what's actually happening. "You went somewhere," he said, not accusatory, just accurate. I did. "Where did you go?" I wrapped my hands around my mug, somewhere in my head that makes me preemptively sad about things that haven't happened. It's a lovely neighborhood. I've been trying to spend less time there. He was quiet, listening. "I got scared," I said. "That's the honest answer. Things started to feel very real, and I got scared, and my instinct was to create some distance so that if it stopped being real, it wouldn't hurt as much." "And did it work?" "No. It just made everything worse, and also I missed you the whole time." Something in his expression softened. "Marco, I know, it's not a great strategy. It's a very human strategy." He turned his coffee cup slowly in both hands. For what it's worth, the 3 days were noted. They were not pleasant. But I didn't want to push because I thought you might need the space, and I was trying. A small pause. I was trying to do the thing where I don't go quiet instead of saying what I need. So I said what I needed, which was to check on you, and then I waited. I looked at him. "You could have pushed a little. Would that have helped?" "No," I admitted. "Then I made the right call." He met my eyes. "I'm not going anywhere, Marco. I need you to know that. I'm not going to disappear because you needed a few days in your head. But I also need you to come back." "I'm back," I said. "I see that." He reached across the table. This time I met him halfway. We stayed for 2 hours. When we finally left the coffee shop, the sky had made up its mind about rain, and we walked through it without either of us caring, talking the whole way. And I thought, this is what I was scared of losing. And the fear of losing it is not a reason to let it go. It is a reason to hold on more carefully. I didn't mean to hear it. I want to say that first. It was a Thursday, early December. The kind of cold that has given up being polite about it. I was at the library in the section stacks, where it's quiet enough to actually think, working on the final structural passes of my thesis when my phone buzzed with a text from Julio saying he was around the corner if I wanted to grab an early dinner before the reading later. I said yes. I started packing up. I was heading toward the front exit when I heard his voice from the seating area near the windows, and I stopped, not to eavesdrop, just because when you know someone's voice, you hear it before you've decided to. He was talking on the phone. I could only hear his half and only fragments of that, but fragments were enough. Yeah, he's good. He's really good. A pause. No, it's different. I don't know how else to explain it, except that I feel like I can talk to him, and I don't. Another pause. I know I said that last time, but this time I mean it differently. I mean, I can tell him things that are difficult and he doesn't. He laughed softly, the way he laughed at things that surprised him pleasantly. No, he does this thing where he just listens first. He doesn't try to immediately fix it or tell me why I'm wrong to feel it. He just, the longest pause. Yeah, I know. I'm just saying I think this one might actually be. His voice dropped slightly. I think I'm in this one. I stood very still for a moment in the aisle between shelves. Then I kept walking, out the side door rather than the front, around the building, arriving at the entrance just as he was putting his phone away, his breath making small clouds in the cold. Hey, he said, looking up with that particular ease he had around me. Hey! I was aware of my face doing things I didn't have full control over. You look weird, he said with immediate accuracy. I'm cold, I said. He looked at me. He didn't believe me, but he let it go, which was one of the things he was good at, choosing the right battles and letting the other things find their own time. I didn't tell him what I'd heard, not then. I kept it to myself like something private, a gift I'd received that I wasn't sure he'd meant to give. He'd said, I think I'm in this one, quietly, on the phone to someone he trusted, when he had no reason to perform it for me, which meant it was true in the unperformative way. The real way. I held on to it through dinner. I held on to it through the reading. I held on to it on the walk home, him beside me and the streetlights doing their cold glittering above us. When we said goodnight at my door, he pulled me in and held me for a moment before letting go, and I thought, me too, I'm in this one too. I just needed to hear you say it when you didn't know I was listening. I said goodnight and went inside. I told him I loved him about a week later, in the middle of an argument, at the worst possible moment, and also the exactly right one. But that is getting ahead of the story. It started as a regular evening. He came over to return a book he'd borrowed, which was a pretext, and we both knew it was a pretext and were both content to use the pretext anyway. Dane was out. The flat was mine in that particular peaceful way that comes when you have space to yourself and then choose to share it with someone, which is different from not having a choice. I made dinner, which is to say, I made pasta, which is the thing I make when I want to cook for someone without admitting I'm trying to impress them. It was good. He said it was good. We ate at the small table by the window with the city outside going about its wet and glittering business. After dinner, we moved to the sofa, which is where things stopped being structured. We talked. That's what it kept coming back to, the talking, which sounds simple and is not. We talked about everything we'd been circling all term, the real things. What we wanted, not professionally, not from school, but from our lives. What we believed about love, and whether it was a thing you fell into or a thing you built. Whether loneliness was always a deficit or sometimes a condition you needed in order to do the work you were meant to do. Whether you could really know yourself before you'd let someone else know you. Somewhere around midnight, he was reading a passage from one of the books on my shelf, and I was watching him from the other end of the sofa, and I thought, with quiet certainty, I am in love with this person. Not, I think I might be, not this could become, I am, present tense, fully arrived, no hedge. The realization sat in my chest like something placed there very carefully. I didn't say anything. It wasn't a moment for saying it out loud yet. There's a difference between feeling something completely and it being time to say it, and I had learned enough about the specific timing of important things to know that some revelations need to breathe before they're spoken. Around 1, he looked up from the book and caught me watching him. He didn't make it awkward, he just held the gaze for a moment and then set the book down and said, "What are you thinking?" "Things," I said. "Good things, very good things, very good things." He came across the sofa then slowly, and I turned so we were facing each other close but not touching yet, and there was that crackling quality in the air between us. The same thing that had been building all evening. "Marco," he said, "yeah, I don't want to go home." I let that sit in the space between us for a moment, let it mean exactly what it meant. Then don't, I said. He kissed me, and this one was different from the first one at the door, different from the brief punctuation ones in between. This was the kind of kiss that means something has shifted, that you've crossed from possibility into presence. And I kissed him back with everything that had been accumulating since the night in the rain, all of it. All the weeks, and the jacket, and the Tuesdays, and the way he said my name like it had always belonged in his mouth. We talked until 4 in the morning. We did other things too, but we also talked, which is the thing about intimacy that no one ever tells you. It's the conversation that makes you feel known. When he finally fell asleep, I lay in the dark next to him and listened to him breathe and thought about the rain and the jacket and the bus and the way everything that changes your life tends to arrive without warning. And I thought that maybe that's the only honest way for things to arrive. If you saw them coming, you'd have too much time to decide you weren't ready. A week later. A morning. He was in my kitchen, which had become a place he occupied comfortably, the way some people settle into spaces without trying, finding the logic of them. He had learned where I kept things. He made coffee without asking because he knew how I took it, which is a form of care so small and complete it sometimes knocked the breath out of me. I was at the table going through some notes, and I looked up at him and at the jacket hanging on the hook by the door, which was still there, which was always still there, and which had become such a permanent feature of the entrance that Dane had stopped commenting on it. "What made you give me your jacket?" I asked. He looked up from the coffee, considered the question like he was turning it over to find its best side. "You were cold," he said. "That's the surface answer." "Yeah." He leaned against the counter, mug in both hands. "The real answer is that I'd been watching you for most of that term, and I never had a good reason to talk to you. Not a real one." We had the 4 awkward short exchanges. And then you were standing in the rain looking like you'd completely forgotten that other options existed. And it was, I don't know. It was an invitation, I think. Not from you intentionally, just from the situation. A pause. "I gave you the jacket because I wanted to do something for you, and then I found that I didn't want to stop." I looked at him. 3 weeks, I said. 3 weeks, he agreed, the corner of his mouth doing that small tucking thing. "I'm not proud of it. Or, I am, actually. A little. Why?" "Because every time you didn't bring it up, I thought maybe you were keeping it for the same reason I wasn't asking. And being right about that was worth it." I pushed back my chair and crossed to where he was standing. He watched me come with that steady attention he gave things. I took the mug gently out of his hands and set it on the counter, and then I was close enough to feel the warmth coming off him, and I said, very close to his ear, "You were right." He let out a breath, soft and low, and his hands came up to my waist. "I know," he murmured. "I just needed you to say it." We stayed like that for a moment, his forehead against mine, the kitchen warm and quiet and coffee-scented, the city doing its morning thing outside the window. "For the record," he said eventually, "you can keep the jacket forever. It's becoming a real feature of my life." "That's the idea." I laughed. He laughed too, and I felt it more than heard it, and it was the most domestic and ordinary and wonderful thing. 2 people laughing in a kitchen in the morning. The entirety of it. No one tells you that loving someone changes the texture of ordinary time. That the same Tuesday that used to be just a Tuesday becomes specifically the day you see him, weighted with a different kind of expectancy. That you start noticing the city differently because you've seen it from the angles he sees it from. And now the same streets have twice as much to say. No one tells you that love is partly an education, that you end up knowing things about yourself you'd have gotten to eventually, but got to faster, because another person is holding up a mirror with one hand and reaching for your hand with the other. Julio made me braver in ways I'm still cataloging. Not in a dramatic way, not in the way of grand gestures or watershed moments, though we had a few of those. In the quiet way, he made me braver about being honest when I was struggling, because he never punished me for it. He made me braver about the work, the writing, because he read my drafts with the specific respect of someone who understood what it cost to put a real thing on a page and had opinions that came from caring rather than from wanting to sound smart. He made me braver about wanting things, about being willing to say, "This matters to me, this is something I need." In return, I gave him things too. I think, I hope. He told me once, in the uncomplicated way he had of saying true things, that I made him want to stay in conversations longer, that I made the world feel like it had more surface area. I wrote that down afterward because I wanted to keep it. We had our difficulties. We were two people with histories and patterns, and the particular scar tissue of past things, and scar tissue doesn't disappear just because you found something new. There were times I went too far into my head and had to be coaxed back. There were times he went too quiet and I had to name it before he would, had to say, "You're somewhere else tonight, where are you?" and wait for him to come back. We navigated these things, not always gracefully, often honestly, which is better. Once, in January, we had a real argument about something that seemed small and was not. He said something careless and I took it harder than he'd meant it, and instead of saying so immediately, I let it build, and when it finally came out, it came out badly. We were both quiet for a long time afterward, in separate parts of the flat, doing that awful thing where you can feel the other person's hurt from across the room. He came to find me. That was the thing. He came to find me, which was the thing he'd identified as his pattern to break. He stood in the doorway of the room where I was sitting and said, "I didn't mean it the way it landed. And I'm sorry it landed hard. Can we talk?" We talked. We said the true things. It was uncomfortable in the way that important conversations are, where the discomfort is proof that something real is at stake. When it was over, I felt hollowed out and also relieved the way you feel after the storm has finally actually broken. And he held me with one arm around my shoulders and his chin on top of my head, and we sat quietly for a while. "This is the part I used to disappear on," he said eventually, into the top of my head. "I know. I'm not disappearing. I see that." I turned my face into his neck. "Thank you." "Marco." He pulled back slightly to look at me. His eyes were serious and warm at once. "I'm in this, properly. I need you to know that." I had been waiting for the right moment to say it. I had been waiting for weeks, carrying it around like something precious, afraid of the weight of it, afraid that naming it would somehow make it fragile. But looking at him right then, in the aftermath of a difficult conversation, in the specific clarity that comes after you've both shown the other person something hard and been shown something hard in return, it felt exactly right. It felt like the only possible thing to say. "I love you," I said. The silence that followed was approximately half a second long and felt like standing at the edge of something. Then his whole face changed, not dramatically, not a Hollywood shift, just the dropping of the last careful thing, the last held back thing, and something that had been tightly held opening. "I love you too," he said, like he'd known it for a while and had been waiting for me to get there, like he was glad I'd arrived. I rested my head back on his shoulder and he pulled me closer, and outside the window the winter city made its ordinary noise, and inside everything was warm and certain and real. The last day of term came with the specific relief that end of semester Fridays carry, that sense of everything exhaling at once. I had turned in my final paper the day before, and I felt that particular clean emptiness that comes after you've given something everything you had. We met at the coffee shop on Marin Street, our Marin Street at this point, the place that had become ours, the way places become yours when enough things happen in them. He was already there when I arrived, reading, the same posture as always, one foot up, paperback in hand, looking like he'd been there forever and was in no hurry to be anywhere else. He looked up when I came in and smiled, and it was still the thing. It still did that thing to me. I suspected it always would. I sat across from him and unwrapped my scarf and said, "I'm done. How does it feel?" Like I was holding my breath for 4 months and finally let it out. Good submission? I think so. I feel like I said something true. That's usually the only metric that matters. He nodded, understanding this completely. "What are you doing for the break?" "Going home for 10 days, dreading it slightly, missing you preemptively." He closed his book. "I'm going to my sister's for a week, then I'll be back." "Then you'll be back," I repeated, testing the shape of it. "Then you'll be back. a whole promise compressed into 4 words. Then I'll be back, he confirmed. We ordered coffee and cake and sat in the warmth of the cafe while the December afternoon did its early, gray thing outside. At some point, I reached down and unzipped my bag and pulled out the jacket. He looked at it, then at me. Something shifted across his face. "The jacket," he said. "The jacket," I said. I washed it again. "Look, I thought maybe since we're both going away." I paused. This was coming out differently than I'd planned it in my head. "I thought you might want it, since it's yours." He was quiet for a moment. He reached across the table and took the jacket from me slowly, and he turned it over in his hands, and then he looked at me with an expression that was so specifically him. So specifically, that careful and open and fully present thing that I had fallen in love with, that I almost couldn't hold his gaze. "You know what I'm going to do with this?" he said. "Keep it?" I offered. He stood up. He held the jacket out across the table. "Put it on," he said. "Julio, Marco, put it on." I looked at him. Then I took the jacket and pulled it on, and it was still the same. That particular warmth, the cedar smell, the weight of it across my shoulders like something decided. He sat back down and looked at me in his jacket with an expression that I will remember for the rest of my life. "It's yours," he said. "It's been yours since October. I'm just making it official." I stared at him. "You're making a jacket official. I'm making you official." He was very calm about this, the way he was calm about most things that mattered to him, that deep, unhurried certainty. "We've been doing this, whatever this is, and I want to be clear that I'm not." He stopped. Reorganized. "I'm not casually here, Marco. I want to be whatever this is officially, with the label on it. I want to introduce you as mine and be introduced as yours. And I want to stop pretending I'm fine with ambiguity, because I'm not. I've been waiting for the right moment, and I'm done waiting." The cafe was warm, and he was looking at me, and I was wearing his jacket, and outside the city was gray and glowing, and this was happening. "Julio Craig," I said, "are you asking me to be your boyfriend using a jacket as the metaphor?" "I'm using it as the official instrument, yes." I laughed. I laughed in that way where it comes out of nowhere and you can't stop it, the full kind. And he laughed too, and the cafe was suddenly too small for how much I felt right then. "Yes," I said, when I could speak. "Obviously, yes." He reached across the table and took my hand. His grip was warm and steady and certain. "Good," he said. "Now drink your coffee." There's a hook by my door. There's always a jacket on it. It's technically his, or it was his, or it belongs to a night in October when the rain came without warning and I was standing on stone steps without an umbrella, which my mother will tell you is a character flaw. What my mother doesn't know is that it was the most useful character flaw I ever had. The jacket has been through a winter and a spring, and the start of another autumn. It's been washed more times than I can count, and it still smells faintly like cedar and that other thing underneath, the thing I named eventually. It smells like him. It smells like the night things changed. He stays over enough that calling it staying over has started to feel like underselling it. We're having the conversation about leases, the practical conversation, the one where you have to look at actual numbers and decide what you're willing to commit to in concrete terms. It's terrifying in the small, specific way that only real things are terrifying. I'm going to say yes to whatever he proposes. I know this about myself. He is, and I have thought about how to say this, and this is the best I've found. He is the person I want to talk to. That sounds simple. It is not simple. Out of everyone I could be telling things to, out of every possible configuration of a life, I want this one. I want the coffee on Moran Street. I want the arguments and the making up and the mornings in my kitchen, where he finds where I keep things and makes coffee before I've asked. I want the long walks and the late nights and the easy silence and the particular safety of being known. 3 weeks. That's how long the jacket hung on my hook before anything was said out loud. 3 weeks of pretending we weren't both waiting, both wanting, both watching the same door and not quite willing to push it open alone. He gave me his jacket once because I was cold. He hasn't asked for it back. I haven't given it back. And here is the thing about jackets. About warmth freely offered and freely kept. They change ownership not when they're handed over, but when they stop belonging to just one person and start belonging to the space between two. The jacket is on the hook. I'm wearing his name in the way I think about Tuesday. He's wearing mine in the way he saves the corner seat. We are, the both of us, thoroughly, irreversibly, each other's. The rain was the beginning. This, all of this, the ordinary beautiful dailiness of it, is the rest. If you made it to the end, you're my kind of person. Leave a subscribe, comment down your favorite part of the story, and if you want early access to videos, exclusive content, or just want to support the channel, hit that join button right below the video. Even one member genuinely means the world to me. See you in the next one.